Congresswoman Crockett's plan? Glenn Youngkin's voice cuts through the silence, smooth and practiced. It's a disaster waiting to happen. A flicker of camera shutters. A pause thick with tension. Across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett sits still unreadable, her hands folded, eyes fixed on Youngkin like a prosecutor studying a witness who's already cracked. He continues, voice rising just enough. If we implement this kind of federal overreach, we're handing our children's futures to bureaucracy and ideology. Our classrooms will become battlegrounds for failed experiments. A few murmurs from his allies. He nods, assured. But Crockett doesn't blink. The hearing room is packed. Reporters along the walls. Phones lifted. A dozen live streams running hot. Staffers exchange glances. They know something is coming, they just don't know when. Youngkin smirks slightly. With all due respect, Congresswoman, you're legislating, based on fantasy, not facts. Still no reaction. Crockett simply shifts her gaze, slow and deliberate, scanning the room like a chess player visualizing the board 10 moves ahead. One eyebrow rises a flicker of expression, barely visible. But it's enough. A signal. Every camera pivots toward her. Youngkin leans back, pleased with himself. The governor turned education crusader. He thinks he's won the room. That's when Crockett moves. She reaches for the mic. Not rushed, not reactive. Just measured. Her voice isn't loud when she begins. It doesn't need to be. It's the kind of voice that makes people put their phones down and listen. "Governor Youngkin," she says, her tone calm as a judge handing down a sentence. "You came here with headlines. I came here with receipts." The room stills. Someone inhales sharply. Crockett shifts a paper slightly forward but doesn't look down. Her eyes are on him now, unwavering. In that moment you could feel it, the pendulum swinging. The temperature of the hearing changed almost imperceptibly. But it changed because this wasn't just politics. This was about to become a reckoning, and then on live television, Crockett spoke. The room would never be the same again. For months, Glenn Youngkin had been carefully crafting his image. The polished reformer, the executive-turned-governor who claimed to put parents back in charge. His legislative blitz through Virginia had earned him praise from conservative media and quiet nods from national donors. Banning divisive concepts, slashing DEI programs, and pushing charter expansions all wrapped in the unassailable language of choice and freedom. But behind the curtains, teachers were leaving in record numbers. School districts were buckling under unfunded mandates. And across the country, families of color were asking a simple question. Choice for whom? Enter Jasmine Crockett. Her bill wasn't just a policy, it was a statement of purpose. A bold, unapologetic federal initiative to inject funding into the very districts the system had long ignored. It proposed minimum teacher pay standards, mental health services, and direct infrastructure funding to Title I schools. The kinds of reforms that didn't play well in donor boardrooms, but sparked real hope in forgotten zip codes. She didn't call it choice. She called it correction, and it sent a jolt through the establishment. Fox News called it radical redistribution. Education lobbies warned of federal overreach. But for millions of families, particularly black, brown, working class, it sounded like someone finally saw them. The media sensed the collision course. CNN teased a potential policy showdown. MSNBC aired back-to-back specials on the plan. Twitter threads turned into Twitter spaces. Youngkin versus Crockett trended for days. School board meetings turned chaotic. Parents citing Youngkin's talking points clashed with Crockett's supporters, quoting funding gaps and crumbling classrooms. The divide wasn't just ideological, it was deeply personal. To Youngkin, this was a fight over control. To Crockett, it was a fight over dignity. Behind the scenes, advisors warned both camps. This hearing might go viral. They were wrong. It would do much more than that, because this wasn't just education policy anymore. It had become a referendum on who gets to define what it means to be American, who gets the mic, who gets the money, and who gets to shape the minds of the next generation. In a nation exhausted by culture wars and political theater, here stood two figures on opposite sides of the moral map, one delivering polished buzzwords, the other carrying stories too long ignored. And on this day, in that packed hearing room, the lines were drawn not in ink, but in values. The cameras were rolling, the tweets were flying, constituents were watching from classrooms, barbershops, church basements, and kitchen tables. Everyone wanted to know, would Crockett hold her ground? Would Youngkin rattle her? Would the system snap back or finally shift? What unfolded next changed the conversation in every newsroom across the country. Before Glenn Youngkin ever signed a bill or stepped into the Virginia governor's mansion, he was a name on Wall Street, a towering figure in private equity, fluent in boardroom diplomacy and high-stakes optics. At the Carlyle Group, he was known not just for deals, but for demeanor. Always buttoned up, always smiling. Colleagues called him the calm closer. Investors loved his polish. When he transitioned into politics, it wasn't on a wave of outrage, it was strategy wrapped in soft tones. Tall, suburban, unthreatening. His red fleece vest became a meme. A Republican even moderates could stomach, one profile gushed. He didn't yell. He didn't sneer. But he didn't need to. Because behind that calm exterior was a political blueprint as calculated as any corporate acquisition. Youngkin's campaign for governor was a masterclass in dog-whistle politics. He never said critical race theory with venom, he simply nodded when angry parents did. He never directly attacked LGBTQ+ teachers, he just signed legislation that chilled their visibility. And when reporters pressed him, he smiled. He smiled when he banned the teaching of divisive concepts. He smiled when DEI programs across Virginia universities were quietly gutted. He smiled when libraries began pulling books off shelves, the kind of books that told the stories of Jasmine Crockett's constituents. To his supporters, this was refreshing. Finally, someone with real-world experience who doesn't sound insane, one Virginia mom said at a rally. He's putting parents back in charge. A suburban dad added, he's not shouting like Trump, but he's still getting things done. But for critics, that was exactly the problem. He's what happens when bigotry wears a blazer, said a former school board member from Loudoun County. He doesn't have to scream to erase you. He just signs the paperwork. Youngkin's policies didn't come with chaos. They came with credentials. The playbook wasn't rebellion. It was rebranding. From corporate C-suites to culture war headquarters. In every photo op, he looked like stability. But the impact on the ground? Turmoil. Teachers feared losing their jobs for speaking on race or gender. Students of color felt erased from curricula. Families in underfunded schools watched as their needs were buried under rhetoric about parental choice. And still, Youngkin smiled. He leaned into the national stage carefully, one Fox News segment at a time. Rumors swirled about 2028. He's the future, pundits whispered. The anti-Trump conservative who can win swing voters and still thrill the base. But Youngkin didn't just want to govern Virginia, he wanted to redefine the conversation on education across the country. That's why he showed up at the hearing. That's why he picked this fight. He thought he was walking into a friendly arena, a place where buzzwords outshined budgets, where his calm demeanor would muffle dissent. What he didn't expect, what no one in his circle truly accounted for, was Jasmine Crockett. She didn't come from a think tank. She didn't enter Congress through country clubs or consulting firms. She didn't need a focus group to tell her what children in underfunded schools were facing. She'd lived it. She'd defended it. And now she was legislating for it. Youngkin had his narrative. He'd spent years polishing it. But while Glenn polished his narrative, Jasmine was building something else entirely. Long before the cameras, the headlines, or the committee room face-off, Jasmine Crockett stood in a Dallas courtroom, defending people the system forgot. A Texas-born civil rights attorney, she came up not through party machines or political families, but through public defense. She sat beside men who couldn't afford bail, and mothers charged for defending their children. She saw how policy shaped lives not in theory, but in sentencing. That courtroom sharpened her. She learned how to think fast, speak clearly, and fight without raising her voice. "You're too passionate to survive in politics," someone once told her. They were wrong. By the time she reached Congress, she'd already gone viral more times than some members had passed bills. Her House committee exchanges became online masterclasses. Calm, surgical dismantlings of misinformation. She didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. She just didn't blink. But behind the headlines was something deeper. Jasmine Crockett hadn't forgotten where she came from, and she never let Congress forget it either. On a humid morning in South Dallas, she walked the halls of her old middle school. The paint was faded, the lights flickered, and the AC groaned like it wanted to give up. A group of eighth graders followed her down the hall, wide-eyed. One girl whispered, "She looks like my cousin." She laughed with the students, asked them what they wanted to be, sat down in a cafeteria chair with them and asked if the chicken nuggets still sucked. They said they did. She said that figured. Then she walked into the teacher's lounge and asked about resources. The room got quiet. One teacher said, "We don't get asked that question much." She listened for over an hour, took notes, asked follow-ups. Not once did she check her phone. That visit wasn't a photo op. There were no cameras, no press. Just a congresswoman doing what most don't. Out of those visits and dozens like it came a plan. A real plan. One that didn't ask schools to do more with less. One that didn't assume federal oversight was a threat. Her education proposal wasn't radical. It was logical. But in a system built on hierarchy and tradition, logic can sound like rebellion. It called for mandatory teacher salary floors so no educator would work two jobs to survive. It prioritized mental health services in every public school, not just the wealthy districts. It proposed infrastructure grants to update dangerous buildings, the kinds with exposed pipes and mold in the ceiling tiles. But most of all, it recentered the conversation. "We've spent decades asking what schools need to produce better workers," she said in an interview. "How about what they need to protect children's dignity?" Grassroots educators lit up. One organizer in Houston said, "She actually listens." A counselor in Atlanta, "She reads the reports we send. She calls back." The teachers' unions noticed. So did the advocacy groups. But it wasn't just the left leaning in. Moderate parents began attending her town halls. Veterans in underserved rural districts showed up with handwritten notes. She wasn't speaking in slogans. She was talking about class sizes, PTSD in students, and teachers paying for supplies with their own paychecks. And then, there was her story. Crockett never romanticized her own education. She talked about the books that were falling apart, the guidance counselor who told her to be realistic, the college applications she filled out with no help, the moments she doubted if people like her belonged in law school at all. She turned those doubts into fire. Not just to get into Congress, but to prove that the rules of power could be rewritten. Because in a room full of legacy lawmakers and Ivy League pedigrees, Crockett was something they hadn't planned for. A woman who didn't ask permission. She didn't just propose policy. She made people feel seen. She spoke the language of urgency, not decorum. And when she talked about the future, it wasn't some vague promise, it was a blueprint with names, budgets, and line items that scared the people who benefit from the status quo. So when Glenn Youngkin stepped into that hearing room, prepared with his talking points and tailored smiles, he thought he was confronting a progressive congresswoman with a flashy plan. He thought it would be a policy debate. He thought it would be familiar. He was wrong, because Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to win an argument. She was there to shift the ground it stood on, so when Youngkin challenged her, he wasn't debating a politician. He was facing a movement. The room was packed. Rows of staffers, journalists, and policy aides lined the walls, pens poised above notepads, eyes bouncing between the two names at the center of it all, Glenn Youngkin and Jasmine Crockett. The committee chair gavelled in. Cameras panned. Microphones blinked red. The hum of live streams surged in the background like distant thunder. Youngkin leaned forward, expression measured. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, tone calm but sharpened, "your proposal might sound good on paper, but it's disconnected from what real parents are facing in this country." A few heads nodded from his side of the aisle. "You're out of touch with real parents," he said, just slightly louder, as if the repetition made it truer. Crockett looked up slowly. No eye roll, no frown. Just a pause, the kind that silences everything around it. She leaned into her mic, tilted her head slightly. "Which parents?" she asked, voice low, steady. The words hung there, heavy. Youngkin blinked. "Because the parents I spoke with last week in South Dallas," she continued, "they're wondering why their children are in buildings with broken heating. The parents in South Oak Cliff are wondering why they've buried 5 teenagers in 2 years and haven't seen a single mental health counselor walk through their school doors." He shifted in his seat. "Parents," he countered, "are worried about the curriculum, not the ventilation, about what's being taught in classrooms, not how many federal dollars can be wasted by Washington." He pulled a chart from his folder. "Test scores in Texas are stagnant. You can throw money at it, but the results are clear." Crockett raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "You mean the test scores in districts that haven't had updated textbooks since 2009? A few gasps. "You want to talk results?" she said. "Let's talk about the 80% teacher retention rate in schools that do have support staff. Let's talk about the 30% drop in suspensions when students have a counselor, not a cop." Youngkin's voice lifted. "This is federal overreach. It's a power grab disguised as compassion." The temperature in the room shifted. He was louder now, less polished. The rhythm that had made him comfortable was breaking. But Crockett didn't flinch. She let the noise pass, then smiled. Just faintly. "I'm not grabbing power," she said. "I'm restoring it to the students your policies leave behind." He tried to interject. She kept going. "Let me ask you, Governor," she said, sliding a page across the table. "When was the last time you visited a school where the lunch line ends before the kids do? When did you last sit in a classroom where there's 1 teacher, 40 students, and no heat in December?" His mouth opened, but the answer didn't come. "I know the numbers," she said, "but I also know the names." A silence swept through the room. Even the committee chair stopped shuffling papers. She leaned back. "You can call it overreach," she added. "I call it overdue." And then she delivered the line no one would forget. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She tapped the microphone once, then spread out a small stack of papers in front of her. The silence was dense, electric. Youngkin shifted slightly in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks. A tick. He sensed what was coming, but not the shape of it. "Not yet. Let's talk," Crockett said slowly, "about who's really failing the kids." A pause, long enough for the sentence to sting. "Governor Youngkin has positioned himself as a champion of education. But let's go beyond slogans." She lifted the first page. "This is a copy of Virginia's 2023 Education Budget Summary. Right here, $201 million cut from public K-12 education funding across the state. Not one time, not pandemic-related, just gone." She held it up to the cameras. Someone in the back gasped. Youngkin sat straighter. These cuts disproportionately impacted low-income and rural schools, districts that were already struggling. So what filled the gap? She didn't wait for a response. I'll tell you, corporate-funded charter programs, private donor-backed initiatives with zero accountability and zero transparency. The second document snapped onto the desk. This is a list of campaign donations totaling $1.4 million from education lobbying groups tied to those same charter organizations. Groups that coincidentally saw massive growth in state contracts during your first 18 months. Youngkin's lips parted as if to respond. She cut in, still calm. I'm not suggesting impropriety, Governor. I'm just asking why your parental choice always seems to benefit a very specific group of donors. A low murmur spread across the committee bench. Some members leaned forward. Journalists' fingers raced across keyboards. She turned to the next page. Here's an internal memo from your own Department of Education, dated last August. It states, quote, anticipated loss of qualified educators due to morale concerns and politicized scrutiny. That's your department, sir. Warning that your policies are chasing teachers out of classrooms. The air shifted. The room wasn't with him anymore. But let's say it's not about money, she continued. Let's say it's about outcomes. She clicked a remote, and a small screen lit up behind her. Slide 1. Virginia 4th grade reading scores, down 11%. Slide 2. Black student dropout rates in Richmond, up 18% in 1 year. Slide 3. Statewide teacher vacancy reports, the highest in a decade. She turned the screen off. You say I'm out of touch with real parents, she said, voice low but cutting. But I've met them. I sat in their living rooms. I've held their hands at vigils. I've walked with their kids through hallways with no working toilets and no guidance counselors. She looked directly at him now. The smile was gone. What you've done, Governor, isn't reform. It's abandonment. A beat. Stillness. Youngkin's jaw clenched. His hands remained on the table, but they were no longer steady. One finger twitched against the wood. A camera zoomed in. She leaned in. See, I didn't come here for your approval. I don't need your validation to fight for students who don't look like the ones in your campaign ads. A ripple ran through the room. Youngkin opened his mouth again. Crockett kept going. I came here to get these kids what you refused to give them. The room exploded. Gasps, audible murmurs. Even the committee chair blinked, stunned. She didn't react. She just stacked the papers again, neatly, precisely, and sat back. Reporters were already texting. Aides whispering furiously. On Twitter, a new hashtag began to flicker to life. Crockett clapped back. Within seconds, it was trending. Commentators clipped the moment. TikTok creators remixed it. One user posted the quote over slow-motion footage of Crockett sliding the documents forward, set to swelling strings. You refused to give them. The words echoed across platforms. The committee hearing was still in session, but something had already shifted not just in the room, but across the country. Crockett didn't just win the exchange. She reframed the debate. She had come in as a voice for underserved students. She left the chamber as something else entirely. But the internet, it was just getting started. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words hit the airwaves, the reaction was immediate and seismic. Within minutes, the clip of her dismantling Glenn Youngkin had been chopped into a dozen TikTok edits. One creator overlaid the line, "I came here to get these kids what you refused to give them," with a slow zoom and a bass drop. It racked up 800,000 views in 4 hours. On Twitter, the Crockett clapback hashtag was trending nationwide by nightfall. Thread after thread broke down the exchange, highlighting her receipts, fact-checking her stats, and lauding her composure. One user wrote, "This is what leadership looks like. Calm, smart, unbought, unapologetic." Instagram reels flooded in side-by-side reactions, student testimonials, Text on screen quote graphics that went viral in progressive circles. One showed a split screen of Crockett's speech and dilapidated classrooms in Mississippi, with the caption, "Why she's right. Why we can't look away." Conservative media scrambled. Fox News ran segments calling the moment scripted political theater. Others accused her of grandstanding for social media. But the spin didn't stick because the receipts were real, and people had already seen them. MSNBC called her takedown a masterclass in poise and purpose. A New York Times op-ed titled "The Crockett Moment" praised her for doing what no education committee hearing has done in decades: make people care. Teachers' unions released statements of support within 24 hours. One Virginia high school teacher wrote, "Crockett said what we've been screaming into the void for years." Parents began reposting the clip with their own commentary. A mother in Detroit filmed a reaction video from her car. "This woman's fighting for my kids. I don't care what party she's in, I'm riding with her." And Gen Z? They turned it into a movement. Teens from Oakland to Orlando shared the video across Discord servers and Snap Stories. One high schooler edited the moment into a Minecraft roleplay video. It still hit 500,000 views. On YouTube, political compilation channels dubbed the exchange Crockett vs. Youngkin, the debate that broke the internet. Twitch streamers streamed the clip in real time, reacting in disbelief. "This is the most composed roast I've ever seen," one streamer said, laughing. "She didn't raise her voice. She just cooked him." The Congressional Black Caucus reposted the clip with her quote in bold, "I don't need your approval. I need these kids to be seen." Even outside politics, the ripples were felt. Celebrities reposted the moment. Ava DuVernay tweeted, "Give her a mic, and then get out of the way." Tabitha Brown stitched it on TikTok with a tearful, "Yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am." Advocacy groups moved fast. A petition calling for expanded hearings on education equity hit 100,000 signatures within 48 hours. Email lists flooded with signups. Donations surged to down-ballot education candidates across the country. But behind the viral swell was something deeper. Political donors noticed. A key donor from Chicago told Politico, "She's got the receipts, the voice, and the moral center. That's rare." A national progressive PAC added her to their next-gen leaders list. Her office fielded hundreds of interview requests, speaking offers, and town hall invitations. But Crockett didn't chase the spotlight. She kept going. 2 days later, she posted a simple clip on Instagram. No production, just her in a school hallway. Caption: "This is who I fight for. No spin, no filter." And in a moment that no one predicted, Crockett became more than a headline. Weeks after the hearing, Jasmine Crockett stood in front of a cafeteria full of students at a public high school just outside Houston. No cameras, no teleprompter, just folding chairs, a tired sound system, and the low hum of adolescence. She looked out at them, some slouched, some wide-eyed, some scrolling their phones, and smiled. "I know some of y'all don't want to be here," she began, drawing a laugh, "but you're exactly who I came for." She paused, then added softly, "Because you were never the problem." The system was. It landed differently in that room. She didn't speak in grand abstractions. She told them about growing up in Texas, walking to a school that had one working copier and ceiling leaks in 3 classrooms. About being told not to aim too high. About fighting for clients who dropped out not because they weren't smart, but because the system was never designed for them to thrive. Her message was simple. Education, she said, is not a privilege for the lucky. It's a promise, a contract this country made with its children. And for too long, that contract had been broken, rewritten, or outright ignored. She pointed to a row of students in the back. "Every single one of you deserves to learn in a place that's safe, supported, and seen." This wasn't a policy pitch. It was a moral reframing. Some folks want to distract you with noise, she continued. Tell you it's about politics. Left versus right. CRT versus patriotism. But that's the bait. She leaned in slightly, her voice lower now. Intimate. The real divide, she said, is between truth and distraction, between service and strategy, between people who want to help and people who want to win. You could hear a pin drop. She told them about the moment with Youngkin, the viral quote, the headlines, and then she waved it off with a soft laugh. That was one day, she said. This? You? That's the work. The teachers in the back nodded. One wiped away tears. A senior girl whispered to her friend, "She sounds like she's talking to me." Because she was. In that moment, Crockett did something bigger than legislate. She modeled power not as dominance, but as clarity, not as control, but as responsibility. She stood before them not as a politician, but as proof. Proof that someone like them could step into rooms not built for them and speak with such truth that the walls would have no choice but to echo. And that was the moral. When someone truly prepared steps into power, the entire game changes because they don't just write the policy. They rewrite who gets to hold the pen. Glenn Youngkin walked into that hearing believing he was the authority in the room. He had charts. He had buzzwords. He had confidence. But what he didn't have was Jasmine Crockett's fire, her lived truth, or her unwavering clarity. He challenged her education plan, expecting a soundbite battle. What he got was a national reckoning because, while he came prepared to defend politics, she came prepared to defend children. And in front of a live audience and millions more online, she didn't just respond. She demolished his argument, point by point, line by line. Youngkin underestimated her. The country watched her rise. And now you're part of that story too. If you believe in policy that uplifts, not divides, if you believe in dignity over distortion, facts over fear, if you believe that schools should build futures, not battles, hit subscribe. Share this moment. Let the next Crockett know. We see you because the fight isn't over. But the playbook has changed, and now we know what it looks like when someone walks into power not with ego, but with purpose. Slow cinematic fade. One final quote. Voice echoing. Like a promise. I didn't come here to get your approval. I came here to get these kids what you refused to give them. Rep. Jasmine Crockett.